She confirmed for me a conversation we had this fall.
Tonight, Prime Minister Trudeau pressed for answers on whether direction was demanded from former Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould.
Moving forward, it is something that we will be having further discussions with Leadership Council with respect to those changes.
The province of Manitoba pushes back on allegations that it's holding up new federal legislation on child welfare.
They've never seen this before, and perhaps I may be the last person who's doing this.
Okay. And a way of life turns into a family business in Fort Chipewyan. Good evening, welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward. The SNC-Lavalin scandal shifted its focus today to British Columbia. A report last week alleged the Prime Minister's office put pressure on then Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould to intervene in the criminal trial of engineering giant SNC-Lavalin. Last month, Wilson-Raybould was shuffled from Justice to Veteran Affairs. Prime Minister Trudeau was in Vancouver to make a housing announcement. He welcomed news that Ethics Commissioner Mario Dion will be investigating the matter because he said it is important for Canadians to have confidence in the system. Trudeau also said he met with Wilson-Raybould a couple of times since arriving in BC.
She confirmed for me a conversation we had this fall, where I told her directly that any decisions on matters involving the Director of Public Prosecutions were hers alone. I respect her view that due to privilege she cannot comment or add on matters recently before the media. And I also highlight that we're bound by cabinet confidentiality. In our system of government, of course, her presence in cabinet should actually speak for itself.
Opposition party leaders reacted to news of the ethics investigation this afternoon. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh welcomed an investigation by Ethics Commissioner Dion, while Andrew Scheer wants to hear from Wilson-Raybould herself.
You know, we heard today Justin Trudeau said that he spoke to Jody Wilson-Raybould and he reported on the nature of those conversations. I think it's time for Justin Trudeau to stop speaking for Jody Wilson-Raybould and let her speak for herself.
Well, I think what the Ethics Commissioner has shown is that there is something here to be investigated, that there's something troubling about the allegations. There's something deeply troubling about the fact that we've got a government that's essentially put forward a loophole that benefits this corporation and fired an Attorney General who tried to resist pressure to go along with dropping this case.
Manitoba's Conservative government is changing the way it funds child and family services authorities. The province has previously been criticized for keeping money meant for kids in care and for incentivizing apprehensions. The new model will see block funding for CFS authorities, which means a set dollar amount will be allotted. Authorities previously received money for each child in care. The province will also stop the practice of keeping 20% of the children's special allowance. Beginning April 1st, the money will go to the agencies. Last April, 6 CFS agencies went to court to have the practice stopped. The province says the new funding model will allow agencies to create programming and resources to limit apprehension rates.
What we're also doing is providing predictability as well for those authorities so that they know what the funding will be for the next 3 years. So that's a really important component of this as well, is that predictability of what the funding will be. So they can plan ahead a little bit for programming on prevention initiatives for children entering into care.
Meanwhile, First Nations leaders are expressing concern over the upcoming federal child welfare legislation. They are calling for jurisdiction over First Nations children to be transferred to First Nations. But some provinces are fighting that. Today at an event in Vancouver, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau acknowledged the concerns.
And we know that regardless of the fact that some provinces may not want to lose their control over child and family services, it is essential for this country that we stop taking Indigenous kids out of their communities and out of their cultures. We've seen too many times in the past what that leads to, and that is why we are changing that.
On Friday, Assembly of First Nations Regional Chief Kevin Hart said he believes Manitoba is one of the provinces refusing to hand over control.
For us in Manitoba, the long-standing battle has always been provincial jurisdiction over our children, when the long-standing battle has always been we wanted to assert and affirm our jurisdiction over our children when it comes to First Nations Child and Family Services.
At today's funding announcement, Manitoba's Families Minister Heather Stephenson said there's been little consultation between the province and the federal government. She said the province will work with First Nations once the legislation comes out.
Moving forward, it is something that we will be having further discussions with Leadership Council with respect to those changes. Again, those changes haven't been introduced yet in the way of legislation. We know they're pending, and we are committed to working with leadership to see what their reaction is to the federal legislation.
To Alberta now, where about 150 oil and gas supporters gathered for a rally in Lac La Biche. The rally was organized by the Region 1 Aboriginal Business Association. APTN's Chris Stewart was there.
Sean MacDonald wants Canada to know that Indigenous people in Alberta support the oil and gas industry and the pipelines that carry it.
And as you can see in Lac La Biche here, we were built on oil and gas. We had big farming and whatnot as well, but oil and gas is our main source of revenue for Alberta. And whether the rest of Canadians are not like it or admit it or not, but we are the generator, the income generator for Canada.
MacDonald is the president of the Region 1 Aboriginal Business Association. He spearheaded this event and says it's the first Indigenous organized pro-oil rally in Canada.
Oil and gas puts food on my table and allows me to live in the house that I live in and have the clothes on my back.
The loud music, dancing, stew, and bannock were welcomed by those who braved the nearly -30 temperatures to say they support oil, gas, and pipelines.
When I worked for oil and gas from day one, it supported my family and the community.
Rennie Huell is the program director for Whitefish Lake First Nation. He told the crowd that oil and gas creates hundreds of jobs for the people of Whitefish Lake.
Our families benefiting from these employment opportunities. Alone, a First Nation would not be able to generate that. We would not have proper living. We would not have a meaningful way of life, a healthy way of life. With this investment of oil and gas and with this partnerships that we've developed over the years, we managed to build healthy living, healthy lives, independence.
Stan DeLorme is the chair of the Buffalo Lake Métis Settlement. He said layoffs in the industry are felt everywhere.
Since the downturn that has taken place here in the last while, our community has felt it, believe you me. The people that depend on the oil and gas industry for work, the people that depend on the oil and gas industry for business as well. And it's not only our community, it's the whole area.
The rally concluded by having dozens of oil service vehicles drive a 50-kilometer route around nearby rural areas. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Lac La Biche, Alberta.
To the NWT now, where government workers were holding their breath over the weekend, awaiting a possible strike, which was slated to start today. The workers have been without a collective agreement since 2016, and many have not seen a pay raise. In a last-minute deal, the government and the Union of Northern Workers reached a tentative agreement. Both parties have agreed to binding recommendations from a mediator. A strike would have impacted 4,000 unionized employees, from janitors to medical transcribers.
The member for Hay River South, the member for Tabacha.
All of the copies of a book in a school in Nova Scotia have been removed. More on that coming up after the break. Here's a look at Tuesday's weather forecast starting on the east coast. -4 with showers for Halifax, sunny and -8 in Charlottetown. 18 below under the sun for Nain, -15 in La Grande River. -11 for Montreal and Val-d'Or, 16 below with sunny skies in Saguenay. 0 for Toronto, +4 in Sarnia and Windsor, -7 in Thunder Bay, -9 in Wawa. Over in northern Manitoba, -17 in Puckatawagan and the Paw, 14 below with snow for Norway House, -9 and snow for Winnipeg, Gimli, Princess Harbour and Barons River. -20 for North Battleford, Regina and Estevan, -21 in Saskatoon, 20 below for Uranium City and Meadow Lake. Welcome back. School officials at Rexton Elementary School scrambled to remove copies of an offensive book. The text read, "I am an Indian and I will scalp you." That's what a grade 5 Mi'kmaq student read in a book in her classroom. Angel Moore has more.
It's read in French and tell me what it means in English.
Emma Ward Levi did not expect to find a book in her school with racist comments. She wasn't sure what to do, and she was worried other kids would see it and feel hurt, so she brought the book home.
It wasn't appropriate to be in a kid's book, and it's really racist what they had put in it.
Rexton Elementary neighbors also booktook First Nation, and a lot of students attend the French immersion program there. The school immediately removed the book and apologized to Emma and her family. This experience has inspired her and her friends to raise awareness.
We were thinking about making posters or billboards just to put up, and we wanted to decorate them saying racism is rude and all that.
Emma's grandmother says it's time for racism to stop, and they're starting a campaign. She says she's going to reach out to her community and government for support to make change.
It's putting up billboards right across Canada with pictures of First Nation children on them and putting some slogans on those pictures saying, "We are proud of who we are, our culture is beautiful, our language is beautiful."
Levi Augustine is in charge of the education programs in Elsipogtog schools. He says his goal is for all schools to have more First Nation content to change stereotypes, and for the province to support the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action and make First Nations education a priority.
And I believe that if we put more accountability into teaching First Nations treaty education and curriculums and resources, so that incident that happened here would not have happened.
Augustine says the province is making progress, but when racist material shows up in schools, it is clear a lot more work needs to be done. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Elsipogtog First Nation.
And we'd like to hear what you think. Here's how to continue the conversation. Send your emails to news@aptn.ca. Find us online at aptnnews.ca and on youtube.com/aptnnews. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for the latest Indigenous headlines. As we reported last week, Canada tabled its long-awaited Indigenous Languages Act. The reaction to it so far has been mixed. Here's host Melissa Ridgen with a Mohawk perspective from Ellen Gabriel.
So Bill C-91, an act respecting Indigenous languages, do you support or do you have any concerns regarding the bill?
I still have concerns. I think there are some things that we could use as far as protecting our rights, our linguistic rights, but also there are things in there that talk about the mention of self-determination, which I think is something that is an internationally recognized rights. Section 35, which people like to quote, which includes our inherent right, which is a pre-existing right, is something that needs to be protected and implemented. So they are mentioned in the legislation. And so there are things that I think are good about the legislation. Things that are kind of a little bit weak is, and I think everybody is thinking of that who works in language revitalization, is the issue of funding and how is that going to look like? Because we there's no such thing as a First Nations language. I speak Kanien'kehá:ka, and there are different language groups right across Canada, and we're all at different places. But at the end of the day, it's really about how can we get that long-term sustainable funding that actually addresses assimilation, genocide, and colonization. How can we get that kind of funding so that we can recruit new speakers, that the children and youth will be speaking it, and to be able to have the maintenance of our languages. And I think, that it has some merits. Whether we can strengthen it, that's another question. But I think it's high time that languages were given this kind of priority and attention.
And so what are your thoughts about the establishment of a Commissioner of Indigenous Languages and 3 directors to help promote and revitalize Indigenous languages and to oversee a budget for the office?
Yeah, I don't think they will be the ones who are maintaining and promoting. They can promote the languages, and it's understanding of the dire consequences of not being able to speak your language. The commissioners I think, are not the main key for me. It's about how at the grassroots are we going to do that. The language commissioner will, of course, answer to Parliament and provide reports and hopefully help communities who are just beginning language revitalization. But the key is, how are we going to have reclamation, which is mentioned, the maintenance of our languages at the grassroots. The funding should be used strictly and solely for the revitalization and maintenance of our languages. And we need to pay our people to speak our languages because of the impact of Indian Residential School. In Quebec, we have the French language that is also imposed upon us. And I think with the mention of having it constitutionally recognized, at least, that could be something that will help us in the work we're doing. But that remains to be seen. And I think that what we need to say is who is doing the actual work of language revitalization and maintenance are the people in the communities. And we can't spread ourselves too thin on this because of the urgency of the situation.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share those points with us on this very important bill. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Time for a quick break, and then we'll introduce you to a dog sled team in northern Alberta. Stick around. Here's the rest of Tuesday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta. Minus 23 under sunny skies for Peace River. Minus 18 and snow for Medicine Hat. 20 below for Red Deer and Edmonton. Plus 2 in Victoria, a rain-snow mix, and 3 above for Tofino. Minus 16 in Prince George, 15 below in Dease Lake. Minus 3 for Old Crow, minus 5 in Rock River, 19 below in Watson Lake, 14 below under sunny skies for Fort Liard and Trout Lake, minus 20 in Yellowknife, 12 below for Sax Harbor, minus 2 for Fort McPherson, minus 26 in Chesterfield and Arviette, 29 below in Baker Lake, minus 29 in Arctic Bay, 30 below in Joe Haven. Welcome back. A family-owned business in Fort Chipewyan is keeping traditions alive by running dog sled tours. It's the only business like it in northern Alberta, and it comes with a lot of work. Tamara Pimentel spent a day with the dog team.
His dog team is something Robert Grandjam takes great pride in. It's his hobby, his income, and his culture.
It's really, really important to pass that on and sadly, a lot of young people are not interested in doing this anymore.
He passes the tradition on to visitors of Fort Chipewyan. Grandjam and his wife created Atim Ostagwan dog sledding and boat tours. People from the south travel here to get a taste of northern culture, and it's the only business like it in Fort Chip.
A good way to retain our culture was to practice it and share it with visitors. We see that in the eyes of the guests that they're so interested. They've never seen this before, and perhaps I may be the last person who's doing this.
But getting these dogs ready to hit the trails isn't an easy task. Grandjam visits his net on Lake Athabasca regularly to feed his family and his dogs. This time he caught about a dozen in his net. Grandjam says rather than buying dog food at the local grocery store, feeding his dogs fish is healthier and more cost-effective. It also allows him to monitor the condition of the lake, with oil production happening near Fort McMurray.
If you see the fish every day and you're keeping an eye on things, you're watching what's going on. So I think that's why it's so important to continue this lifestyle. Hello, dogs. Hello, dogs.
When he gets back to the dog lot, it's feeding time, and any extra harvested meat is fed to the dogs as well. When it's time to take the dogs out, Grandjam harnesses them up with decorative dog blankets created by his wife.
The reason they used this long time ago was because the elders of the community were giving away their daughters. So when they gave their daughters away, they wanted to give it to a good provider. So if you had a beautiful team of dogs, well, you were naturally a good provider and a good trapper, a hunter. So you got the best wives. But then also if the man was married already, well, his wife was really esteemed because he could sew so well. She could sew better than all the other women. So there was a real competition to have the most beautiful dogs. Okay.
The hour-long ride takes tourists through creeks, forests, muskeg, and sometimes through town, where residents stop and watch the most beautiful dogs in all of Fort Chip. Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Fort Chipewyan.
Nice story. That's your APTN National News for this Monday. But before we go, an update on the Young Spirit Singers, that Alberta powwow group that were up for a Grammy at last night's show in Los Angeles. Young Spirit was nominated in the Best Regional Roots category for their album, Mu a Sensational Cree Round Dance Songs. They didn't win, but the group did have the opportunity to perform on the famous red carpet, and that's where we'll leave you tonight. Have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.